All right, hi everyone, and welcome to this Hangout on Air with Learn with Google. My name is Nicole Primo, and I'm the Partner Education Manager for Google's Shopping and Emerging Ads. And I've probably seen or talked with many of you before, but I'm excited to be here today as this is our last Hangout on Air about the very quickly approaching shopping campaigns auto upgrade on August 31st. So what we're going to do today is we're going to walk you through the entire process. It's going to be a lot of content, basically starting with what you need to know about shopping campaigns, how you can analyze your current campaign, and then the steps you need to take to actually upgrade in advance of the auto upgrade deadline. So for those of you who are new to this platform, welcome, and just a few quick logistical notes. First of all, the webinar is recorded in its entirety, so at any point after the event today, you'll be able to go back, rewatch parts, look at those screenshots, look through the demo, all of those things. And also, if you have questions at any point, you should see a Q&A widget on the right-hand side of your screen. So feel free to chat in your questions at any point. We'll have some time for live Q&A at the end. And do note that there's an ability to vote on people's questions. So if you see a question that you also have, make sure you vote for it because this bumps them to the top of the list, and that's where we'll start. So I am going to start sharing my screen so that we can cover our content for today. Great, so here's what we'll be covering at a high level. On our agenda today is, as I mentioned, starting to talk about why we're making you do this. What is the opportunity that shopping campaigns presents for retailers and their agency partners and just the whole ecosystem at large. Next, I will give you kind of an at-a-glance, zoomed-out view of what the shopping campaign creation process looks like, and then we'll deep dive into the steps to upgrade. That is, assuming you already have a PLA campaign running, how do you transfer it over and really get the most out of your shopping campaign? And then last but not least, we'll talk about what you need to do if you're thinking beyond kind of the core campaign setup for some more advanced best practices. So without further ado, let's start with that shopping campaign opportunity. So essentially, when we started launching the paid PLA unit about a year and a half, 2 years ago, we had high hopes, but we weren't really sure how it would work. So we kind of put it together in this search network only campaign. What we saw is that retailers had phenomenal success with this product listing ad concept, and so we wanted to give them now a better way to actually manage their retail ads in the AdWords interface. So we figured it was time for a revamp of how you manage and report on your PLAs, so we started thinking about this concept of shopping campaigns and started talking to retailers of all shapes and sizes, and what they told us is kind of an intuitive, self-evident retail truth, which is they plan, organize, and price their inventory in order to manage their business. So the same way that they'd put a sale sign above their clearance rack to get rid of that inventory, or they'd move a trending item to the front prime real estate to get people into their store, they wanted to have these same levers that they could apply that strategy online. So when we started to think about how we would design shopping campaigns, we came at it from that retail-centric campaign management focus. We wanted to be able to give you the levers to know how you're promoting your products easily and according to your strategy in your AdWords account. Next, we wanted to give you advanced reporting so that no matter how you actually bidded on and promoted your items, you'd be able to do kind of a deep dive to figure out which brands, which product types, and even which individual products were working well so that you could tailor your strategy accordingly. And then last but not least, it's really hard to know how you're doing when you're operating in a vacuum. So we wanted to give you some comparative and competitive landscape data so that you understand how is your performance comparing to your competitors and to your peers in the retail space, which obviously gives you more insight into how much more competitive you can be or how you need to tailor and optimize. So taking a high-level view of this first, just so that we're all on the same page about how you should be thinking about your shopping campaign, there are 3 basic steps to actually creating a shopping campaign and getting it running. Number 1, of course, you have to create the darn thing. Next, you have to select your settings for your new campaign. And last but not least, you'll segment your inventory into product groups. So that third step is where you have the most subjective opportunity to organize and optimize your campaign. So in the next couple of slides, we'll be spending most time on that third section. So in terms of creating a new shopping campaign, you have two ways that you can do it. You can either do it in the AdWords front-end interface like you see here, or you can do it through the API. So assuming that most of you will be doing it through the AdWords front-end, of course you'll do it like you always do when creating a new campaign, click that plus campaign button, and this time you'll create the shopping type campaign. So note that this is different, and hopefully it clues you in that we're investing a lot in creating this new campaign type, and it will give us the basis through which we can build additional functionality and features moving forward. So for now, new campaign, choose that shopping type. From there, you'll create your settings. You'll walk through this on-screen instructions. These should be very familiar, very similar to text ads, display ads, all of that, where you set your daily budget, you link your Merchant Center account, choose your language and geo-targeting, and click Next. And then the beauty of shopping campaigns is that's it. Right now, you would have a basic shopping campaign, which means that 100% of the eligible products in your data feed are now ready to show as product listing ads, and they all have the same bid. So you can see here, we're calling that an all products group, and since I set my default bid to 65 cents in the last slide, that would be my default max CPC. So hopefully you see that this is a great starting point. Now you have full coverage, all of your products are ready to go as PLAs, but obviously there's more you can do if you're looking to tailor your return on investment. So assuming I'm a shoe retailer, this all products means that I'm bidding the same on my $10 pair of flip-flops as I am on my $350 pair of dress shoes. Obviously, I want to get more granular because my $10 pair of flip-flops deserves a lower bid than my $350 pair of dress shoes simply because the potential revenue I get as a business is different between those two products. So that's where product groups come in. Essentially, think of product groups as your opportunity to take the whole pie of your inventory and slice and dice to carve out different segments that you want to bid similarly on. So for instance, thinking I'm a kind of a department store, I obviously want to be able to bid differently on my apparel versus my electronics versus my furniture, and essentially I would want to make sure I'm creating a product group for each of those. So obviously, like I mentioned, this is where you can get into much more subjective, hands-on building out your own campaign. So to get us started, let me just walk you through how you'll create these groups in the interface to give you a sense of kind of the theory behind it. So going back, we started with an all products group with a bid at 65 cents, meaning everything in my inventory has that 65-cent bid. To break out product groups, I'll start by clicking the plus button you see here, and I'll get this pop-out window. So this pop-out window represents what's actually in my own data feed. So everything I see here will be the values and the attributes from my own data feed and will be actually what my products are. So as my next step, I'll first need to decide which attribute I want to start subdividing by or how I want to start grouping my products at the high level. So for instance, I have 6 basic options. I can do it by category, which is Google product category in my feed. I can do it by brand, item ID, condition, which is mostly used if I have a large used or refurbished part of my inventory, product type, or custom label. We'll get into some of these later, but for now, suffice to say that essentially you're starting to group by the attribute that you want to categorize by. So in this example, I chose category. Let's say I really want to just be able to group my bikes and my clothing and my parts. So you can see I see all of my values on the left side. I can use the arrow to select which ones I want to bid differently for. In this case, like I said, my bikes, my clothing, and my parts. So after I click Save, you'll see that now my campaign looks a little different. I no longer am bidding at the all products level. Instead, I'm able to bid at the most granular product group available. So for instance, I bid differently on my bikes, differently on my clothing, and differently on my parts. And then you'll notice that the everything else in all products group is automatically created for me. And what that essentially does is it says that anything I did not break out into one of the 3 product groups you see here is now lumped in that catch-all. The nice thing about this system as well is those little speech bubbles that you see next to each product group, you can hover over those and they'll tell you exactly which products are in which product group so that you're very clear about how you're bidding on which of your inventory. So for many of you, one level of granularity is probably not sufficient. You want to do much, much more specific bidding. So you can click that plus button and repeat the process to continue to drill down further into your inventory, making your bids more specific. You can do this up to 7 times total. So what we already did would be 1. I could do it 6 additional times from here. So here's what my campaign might look like broken out just a couple more times. You can see that, let's say, within my bike store, my men's bikes are really a big revenue driver, and I want to be as specific with my bids as possible on different types of bikes. So underneath my men's bikes, I've broken out cruisers, road bikes, and triathlon bikes. And again, note that the everything else in men's is catching all the other bike types, like mountain bikes and touring bikes, that I did not choose to break out more specifically. So hopefully this gives you kind of a high-level sense of how you should be thinking about breaking out and subdividing your inventory. Again, I like to think of it like a bulleted list. Basically, you start with that all products group and you can indent to create sub-bullets up to 7 times. Okay. So hopefully now we're all on the same page about roughly how the campaign structure works. And now let's talk about how you should specifically be looking at your own campaigns to upgrade according to what's worked for you in the past. So high level, here are the 4 steps we recommend you take. Obviously, first, we're recommending that you analyze your regular PLA campaign structure so you know what worked historically. Next, if needed, you'll add custom labels to your feed. From there, you'll create a shopping campaign in Subdivide, like we just talked through. And then, of course, you'll pause your regular PLA campaign when you're ready for that shopping campaign to take over. So step 1, analyzing your existing PLA campaign or your regular PLA campaign. For a little bit of context, we see that most retailers and PLA users use one of 3 approaches to bidding. So I'm going to talk you through these 3 bidding approaches because they most likely correlate to how you structured your campaign, and it gives you more insight into what you should do moving forward. So at a high level, the 3 options are products, meaning I bid first and foremost by my product lines. Second option is pure performance. In other words, I don't care if it's a shoe or a sandal or an electronic. I only want to bid by the performance of my products. And then last, and probably most common that I see, is hybrid approach, which is to say, I want to make sure I'm bidding roughly by my product lines, so shoes versus electronics, but then I also within those categories want to promote my best-selling or my highest revenue-driving items. So my best-selling shoe, my best-selling electronic, for example. To get into these a little more deeply, you can see here talking about that indentation structure or that tree structure, whatever visual helps you understand kind of the shopping campaign's product breakout. Here's what it might look like if you are merchandising by your product lines. So you can see that you're going to use attributes like product type and brand, for instance, starting by apparel, splitting out men's and women's, and then maybe even within women's breaking out the brands that really perform well or have different margins. Next, if you're merchandising purely by your performance, you'll need to use attributes like custom label and item ID. So essentially, and again, we'll talk about custom labels a little bit more in a minute, but for now, suffice to say that custom labels are your opportunity to tag your products based on your own custom key performance indicators. For instance, bestseller, high margin, seasonal. So what this campaign might look like is you say, again, I don't care about my product lines. I only want to focus on bidding differently for my best sellers. Within my best sellers, I want to bid differently for my high margin best sellers and my low margin best sellers. And then within high margin even, I want to bid for the specific 111 item ID that does especially well. Finally, putting these both together, hopefully this seems intuitive at this point, but what you can do as well is at higher levels start with things like product type and brand, and then at deeper levels, again, get into those custom labels or IDs so that you're saying within my women's apparel, I want to focus on my best sellers. Okay. So you might be saying, okay, that's great, but how do I actually figure out what I'm doing and what I should be doing? So this is what we'll walk through next. And your very first step is actually to go into your AdWords account and apply a filter for product targets in your regular PLA campaign that have one or more impressions within the last 30 days. So the reason I suggest starting here is because we've heard a lot of people feel a little bit overwhelmed because they'll have thousands of product targets and they're not sure what they should be focusing on for this upgrade. By throwing this filter on, we see that a lot of people actually have a lot of product targets that are inactive or aren't really doing anything for them. So by filtering just for the product targets that are actively serving ads, you can really focus on what is actually making an impact on your performance. So once that filter has been applied, we recommend you actually download your performance report, and this will help you get the data you'll use to analyze in the next couple of steps, but you can do it in a spreadsheet editor, which just makes it a little bit easier to manipulate and isolate the variables that you need to look at. So in a spreadsheet editor, we recommend you take that report you downloaded and copy and paste that data into a spreadsheet. From there, you'll sort your product targets alphabetically, essentially so that you're grouping all of the brand product targets together, all of the ID product targets together, etc. So now that each product target type is grouped together, you can now count them. So you can do this manually, or you can use your spreadsheet's count function. Essentially, you're trying to get a sense of how many of each type of product target do you have active in your current PLA campaign. So with those counts in mind, you'll create a quick and easy table, nothing too fancy required. I would use something like this, but essentially you're going to record the number of each type of product target you have in your current regular PLA campaign. Next, you're actually going to start looking at the performance by type of product target. So you can do this by looking and sorting and filtering by clicks, impressions, conversion metrics if you have conversion tracking enabled. But essentially what you're trying to do is you're trying to identify of the types of product targets you have in your account, which ones are driving the most volume, the most conversions, or whatever you define as the strongest performance. So you can see, for the sake of it here, I've tried to isolate in my top 20 product targets by clicks, what types of attributes am I using? And here's what I find out. So if I'm purely interested in volume, let's say I don't have conversion metrics enabled, or I really just want to maximize my clicks, I can very clearly see that in my data, product type and ID were by far and away my strongest performing product targets by attribute type. So now I know that for my shopping campaign, I should be thinking about using the campaign template that makes most sense for this type of performance, which if we go back a couple of slides, we would see is that product-focused template, which is to say that I'm looking at first my apparel and my women's, and then I'm getting into the specific IDs that are my best sellers. So hopefully that makes sense. Again, there's a lot of ways you can analyze your campaign, but this is kind of a quick and easy way to use it, nothing too fancy in terms of spreadsheet functionality, just some simple sorting and filtering so that you can understand which are the attributes that you're primarily using to drive your performance in your current campaign. So now we get to the next step, which is adding custom labels, which may not apply to everyone, but is a crucial step for those of you who it does apply to. So basically, when you're creating this table, what you might notice is that some of you rely most heavily on an attribute called AdWords label or another attribute called AdWords grouping. So if you find that AdWords label or AdWords grouping is contributing to the top 20 clicks, then you'll need to take another step, which is you might need to assess if you actually need to be using some kind of custom tagging to organize your campaign. So in shopping campaigns, AdWords label and AdWords grouping cannot be used. So if you truly need labels, you'll need to add a new attribute called custom labels. So before we even get into what adding that attribute needs, I'll just say you should be first assessing if you actually need custom labels. Quite often, we see that people were using labels when they really should have been using either product type or brand. So you can see in the common usage, if the AdWords label equals pants, that would actually be better to put that value in the product type attribute as opposed to using the labels for it. So first step, if you see that a lot of your traffic or a lot of your performance is coming from AdWords labels or AdWords grouping, first assess if you actually need that type of label or if you can use another attribute for that same purpose. So if you do find that you are using labels for things like bestseller or high return on ad spend or seasonality, which is really what they should be used for, you will need to add custom labels to your feed. So to do this, we first recommend that you start by defining a strategy for your custom labels, which is to say you get 5 labels total. Each one should have a definition, more or less, that lets you understand how you'll be using that particular label in your data feed. So for instance, custom label 0, you might define that as your seasonal label, which allows you in custom label 0 to always tag product with either spring or summer or fall or winter. Just to be clear, this table is just one example. You can do this however you want. The key here is to make sure that all of your labels are always lining up. So if you want to group by high margin, that high margin tag always needs to be in custom label 3, for example. So once you have this strategy defined, your last step in terms of custom labels will be adding these to your feed. So you can see here the most important thing is that they line up the way you've defined them in the previous step. And when this is done, you can re-upload your feed so that it takes effect and you can start grouping and pulling out and segmenting by these labels. Another note is make sure you're not deleting the AdWords labels or the AdWords grouping attributes for your feed because they can be used by other ad formats. So just leave them there. They won't hurt anything. Simply add the custom labels when you're ready. Okay, so that's the hard part, I would say. Now we're at the part that we talked about a little bit earlier, so I'll go through this pretty quickly, and it's actually creating the shopping campaign. So as I mentioned, you'll start by creating a new campaign and choosing the shopping type. From there, you'll follow the on-screen instructions to set your settings like budget and default bid. Now we recommend that you pause your shopping campaign, which gives you some time to start building it out and customizing those product groups without it being active. Of course, now you'll start subdividing into your product groups, just like we talked about earlier. And one additional note here is that if you want to choose all of the values at once, you can use that plus button on the top that you see in the green square. Or if you only want to move over certain values, for instance, apparel and accessories and electronics, you can choose the individual arrow and the rest will stay on the left side. Next, you'll apply bids to your product groups. So outside of API, you have 3 options for editing your bids. You can do this directly in the AdWords interface, which entails clicking on the pencil icon and actually editing for each line or product group. Or if you're trying to do something more in bulk, you have 2 additional options. You can download a spreadsheet, as you see in the screenshot here, and make it editable. Adjust your bids in a spreadsheet editor in more bulk and then re-upload. Or you can do this in AdWords Editor if you have familiarity with that tool. One quick note while you're creating your campaign is that you do want to make sure you keep your bids as flat as possible. In your new campaign, if you're looking for steady performance, so no big increases or decreases as a result of your upgrade, you want to try to keep things flat. So if your apparel product type attribute target is working really well at $1.50, in your new shopping campaign, try to associate that same $1.50 bid with your apparel product group. Again, it is a new campaign, so you want to monitor any changes you make a little bit more closely for the first several days than you would if it was an ongoing campaign. So I don't mean to scare you. There's nothing huge that's going to happen. It's the same algorithm that you're familiar with. It's the same auction. This is just to say that with any new campaign where you're making changes to bids or targeting, you just want to check in a little more closely at first to make sure it's performing the way you expect and want. Okay, so we're at step 4, which I would say is probably the easiest, and it's actually pausing your regular PLA campaign. So obviously you want to avoid running 2 product listing ad campaigns at once, so you'll want to pause your regular PLA campaign as soon as you see that your shopping campaign is active and serving impressions. So do note that it can take up to 6 hours for your shopping campaign to start running. So what I would recommend is plan to activate your shopping campaign when you get in, like maybe first thing in the morning. Activate that shopping campaign and wait until you see an impression in it up to 6 hours later, and then pause your regular PLA campaign so you're not missing out on that day of traffic. One additional exciting new opportunity that we announced yesterday is an upgrade tool that can help streamline some of this. So the new Shopping Campaigns upgrade tool basically creates a shopping campaign from your regular PLA campaign using its historical data performance. So you can see which campaigns are not upgraded in your AdWords account in the Settings tab, and anything with the shopping campaign creation status not submitted may be eligible to use the Shopping Campaigns upgrade tool, and you can click on the name of the campaign to find out if it is. So if the campaign is eligible, the tool will walk you through a few steps. It's actually very, very simple. The first step is you'll choose a status that you want your campaigns to take once the new shopping campaign is created. So what I would strongly recommend you do is choose that you'll keep your regular PLA campaign enabled, and you'll pause your shopping campaign so that you can review it before it goes live. From there, you'll click Create Campaign, and Google will start processing your new campaign and creating it for you, and this can take up to 24 hours. So note that during this creation period, you don't want to be adjusting or editing your regular PLA campaign, since that's what we're basing our new campaign structure on. A couple of alerts or notices about the upgrade tool is that while most campaigns are compatible, there are some features and settings that may not be. So if you're seeing a yellow triangle with that exclamation mark, it means that certain settings in your regular PLA campaign are not compatible with shopping campaigns. So this could be that you're using AdWords labels or groupings like we talked about earlier. It could be that you're using automatic bidding, which is not ready in shopping campaigns. And again, these are not going to stop you from upgrading. It's just to say that you need to fix these, and we'll tell you how to do that if you're seeing that yellow icon. The more severe case of this is that there are certain issues that may prevent a campaign from being eligible to use the upgrade tool, and those will be flagged with a red triangle. So this could be that it exceeds campaign limits, it has invalid filter values, some other things like that. All of this is outlined in much more detail in our Help Center article, but if just for now, suffice to say that if you're seeing that red triangle, you will need to address any issues outlined in the details before you can use the upgrade tool, and that may take up to 24 hours. So fix the issues, wait 24 hours, and then refresh and retry using the upgrade tool at that point. Okay, so I know we've covered a ton of content, and that may be enough for most of you, so feel free to kind of tune me out for the next couple of minutes if it is the case that you're good with all the information we've shared so far. If your brain is still working, definitely tune in, as we'll be talking about some advanced tips and tricks in this next section. So multiple ad groups is something that a lot of regular PLA campaigns had, and is something that's specific and unique to shopping campaigns, in that shopping campaigns are designed to help you easily group your products within one ad group. So if you only use a single ad group in shopping campaigns, you basically eliminate the potential of product overlap, which means you only have one bid per product. It allows you to easily identify which products don't have specific bids, and in many cases, it allows you to streamline your campaign management. So I would strongly encourage you to start with one ad group and then only break out multiple ad groups if you see a performance reason for doing so going forward. So in the very limited cases that we've seen, multiple ad groups may be needed if you want to adjust mobile bid modifiers differently across products. So you'd have to have one ad group for shoes with a 35% mobile bid modifier, and then a separate ad group for electronics, let's say with a 50% mobile bid modifier. Or if you're using a more granular negative keyword strategy. So again, most cases I'd recommend using a single ad group. If absolutely needed, you can do multiple ad groups for these reasons or other performance reasons if you have them. The one thing I would note, though, is if you're using multiple ad groups, you need to be much more diligent about understanding where you're bidding on each one of your products. Again, because there's no easy way to track overlap except for kind of in your own strategy outside of AdWords. So if you do use multiple ad groups, with part of this mapping is making sure that you're excluding so that you're not bidding twice across multiple ad groups. So you can see in the example here that this is fairly simple. Let's say ad group 1 is pretty much, maybe most of my products, including my everything else in all products catch-all. Then in ad group 2, where I specifically want to focus my mobile bid modifier on my baby and toddler category, you need to make sure that you're excluding everything else in all products, which essentially means don't bid on any products other than my baby and toddler in this ad group. So that allows that these ad group settings are only applied to the baby and toddler category, and exclusions are really easy to do. You can edit them the same way that you would edit bids. So multiple campaigns are a slightly different scenario in that there are 3 main reasons why it's a great idea to break out multiple campaigns. So the use cases that we'll go into more detail about are allocating budget across subsets of products, responding to the retail calendar like we talked about earlier, and then also targeting multiple countries. So in the first case, this isn't something that's necessarily new or even specific to shopping campaigns, but it is important to note that if you want to be able to say, I want a certain portion of my budget to be dedicated to my best performers or to a certain category of my products, the only way to do that is by breaking out separate campaigns. So in this example for Acme Bikes, you can see the $350 a day campaign was going to bicycles, it was going to parts, and it was going to everything else, but Acme had no control over which portion of that $350 went to which of these products. So they knew from their internal revenue data that bicycles were the biggest revenue drivers. So what they wanted to do is create a campaign for 200 of their daily budget to go specifically to bicycles, and then the other 150 to go to everything else, including parts. So you can see that the total 350 is still the same, but by having 2 separate campaigns, they get more control over which portion of that budget goes to which subset of their inventory. So just like with multiple ad groups, you do need to be a little more conscientious of how you're bidding across campaigns as well, and you will need to use that excluded functionality. So in this screenshot, you can see this is my bestsellers campaign. So I've broken out for one of my custom labels, which is bestsellers, and then I'm bidding a little more granularly on my best-selling bags, my best-selling jewelry, etc. But what I want to be careful to do is make sure that I'm excluding the everything else in all products catch-all. Essentially, I want to make sure that this bestsellers campaign, the budget of $200, let's say, is only going to my bestsellers, and the only way I can do that is by excluding or not bidding on the everything else catch-all. Scenario number 2 gets back to what we were talking about earlier with that idea of putting a big sale sign above your clearance rack or moving your trending items to the prime real estate in your front window. So essentially, starting from the bottom of this slide, you can see we kind of have our core campaign, which is our long-term optimization. On top of that, we have the bestsellers scenario that we just talked through. And then what you can do with an additional campaign is respond to kind of the shorter term promotional or seasonal trends. And there's a key new functionality in shopping campaigns that allows you to do this called campaign priorities. So essentially, campaign priorities allows you to tier or stack your campaigns like we just saw by telling Google which bid to use when there's more than one available for a product. So if we see that you have, let's say your bikes are in 2 campaigns, we'll use the bid from your high priority campaign first, then your medium, then your low, in that order. So what this looks like is that, let's say you have kind of your low priority core campaign where you're bidding on your apparel and you've broken it out. You don't really want to touch this because you've done long-term optimization, you've done all your fine-tuning here. It's really well honed for kind of the day-to-day kind of average search patterns and average shopper interest. But you do have a summer sale going on and you really want to push that short sleeve shirts and shorts, but you don't want to have to adjust that core campaign. So now what you can do is create a high priority campaign in 20 minutes or so, easily break out and target your custom label, associating bids on whatever level you want, and then throw that high priority on it. What this does is it tells Google, first use the bids available for products in this high priority campaign, and if there are none available, then you're good to use my low priority campaign. When sale is over, you simply pause this high priority campaign, and now since there's only one bid available for your short sleeve shirts and your shorts in your core campaign, we'll revert back to that one. So this is meant to be a way that you can more nimbly and more agilely respond to trends, to seasonality, without kind of messing up the long-term work you've put into that low priority core campaign. Okay, so we're almost there, so start entering those questions if you do have any. The last scenario here is, again, the same as always, which is if you're targeting different countries, or if you sell your product in different countries, you'll need one campaign per product, one campaign per country rather, and you'll need to make sure that your data feed is customized to the requirements for that particular country. So for instance, if you're selling in Germany, you need the feed to be in German language as well as German currency with landing pages in German. And all of that's outlined in the Merchant Center Help Center, so if you have questions, feel free to check that out. Okay, so we've made it to our summary and next steps. Basically, I'll just put in a plug. Our friends at Farfetch had really great success with shopping campaigns when they adopted early, and I think that these lessons are only more true kind of the closer we get to that auto upgrade. Definitely check out this case study if you're interested, but you can see the metrics. They kind of speak for themselves. They got these results simply by organizing their product groups by category and brand, so taking that merchandising by product approach, and then creating that separate campaign, like we just talked about, with high priority for their trending or their best-selling products. So fairly simple structure, using a lot of the best practices we talked about, but obviously phenomenal success. And in large part, that's because shopping campaigns give you more time to analyze, they give you more reports to get insights from, and they give you more levers to actually act on what you're seeing in your campaign. So here's what you should be doing as soon as possible, or at very least before the August 31st upgrade deadline. Start by filtering for your top performing products and doing that campaign analysis. Update your data feed if you need to for those custom labels, and then build out your campaign in your product groups. From there, you'll set your bids either in the AdWords interface or in one of the bulk options that I talked about, and then finally enable your shopping campaign and pause your regular PLA campaign. So I know it sounds like a lot, but it's really 5 key steps that are totally doable in the next couple of weeks, and I encourage you to start as soon as possible so that you're prepared plenty of time before the upgrade deadline and that you're really well set up going into the important Q4 holiday season. So at this point, we will dive into our questions. I'm only seeing a handful in here, so if others have them, please enter them. Otherwise, I'm happy to kind of review a couple of frequently asked questions that we've gotten in the past. Okay. So let's start with our first question, which is, what if some of the products in the inventory fall into multiple categories? So for example, health supplements are applicable to multiple health conditions. Will there be cannibalization in traffic? So this is a great clarification question. And essentially the answer is that, I think the question is essentially taking a step back. If I have a product that could be used for multiple Google product categories, what should I do? So when you're breaking out your shopping campaign, you can only choose one value for each product. So if the product, let's say it's a health vitamin A. Health vitamin A can only have one Google product category or one product type in the data feed, which means that when you're targeting it, you can only target it through the one value that it has in the feed. So there's no cannibalization because it simply cannot have more than one value in the feed and therefore cannot be targeted within one ad group more than once. So hopefully that answers the question. If you were getting at something different, feel free to chat back in another question and I'll be happy to answer it. So another great question is about AdWords Editor. And essentially the question is, what functionalities can AdWords Editor support for shopping campaigns? So just to be really clear, if you want to use AdWords Editor, the only functionality it has for shopping campaigns at this point is editing bids and destination URLs. So you can't actually create a campaign or create product groups in AdWords Editor. You'll need to do that only through API or through the AdWords front end. So again, just to summarize, AdWords Editor can be used for bulk editing bids as well as destination URLs. Okay, so I'm going to jump to some frequently asked questions, but if you do have more custom specific questions, feel free to chat them in. So starting with kind of your upgrade, so what bids should you be applying for your product groups? As I mentioned a little bit earlier, the goal here is to use the same bid for your shopping campaign as you were using in your regular PLA campaign. So if the case is that you were targeting apparel at $1.50 and you can target apparel in your shopping campaign, put that same $1.50 bid on there. It may be the case that you cannot target groups of products the same way across the two campaigns. So in that case, what you would want to do is take the closest average that you were using in your regular PLA campaign and apply it to your shopping campaign. So in other words, try to keep your bids as flat as possible, just applying what you had before or the closest alternative. We've also gotten questions about what performance changes you might see when you upgrade. So I know I shared that great case study from Farfetch where they saw phenomenal performance improvements. And I just want to reiterate that this is not because of some algorithm change or some auction preference for shopping campaigns. The back end is still exactly the same across the two campaign platforms. So if you if you replicate your structure in bids in exactly the same way, you won't see any differences, but you could potentially see improvement if you're optimizing and bidding more strategically on your products through shopping campaigns. In terms of how you should be structuring your campaign, people have also wondered if they should be trying to replicate their regular PLA campaign structure as closely as possible in shopping campaigns. So the answer is that, in short, no. Regular PLA campaigns had a lot of nuances, and maybe you figured out some workarounds for things that weren't available feature-wise, and a lot of these have been solved or don't exist in shopping campaigns. So that's why we're recommending you actually take some time to do this upgrade before the holidays, because we think in most cases you'll get far better overall structure, which can help you optimize for performance long-term. Okay, and then this frequently asked question is a little bit out of date, but essentially it's, will there be something that can help me? And as I mentioned, I refer back to those slides on the upgrade tool, which was just announced yesterday, but essentially it can help you start creating your campaign, though I do strongly recommend that you review it before enabling it so that you can make sure that it actually fits your business's goals. Okay, and I'm going to jump back to some of these questions. So Adrienne had a question about, aside from new opportunities for retailers you presented, are there other key changes to terms of use or merchant requirements that are being introduced? So this is a great question. In terms of service, none that I'm aware of. Any kind of major changes to requirements or things like that are always posted on our AdWords blog, which is Inside AdWords. So if you're not following that, make sure you do. The other thing I'll mention is we have introduced some feed specification updates. So these in large part are not required, but may give you more functionality if you choose to opt into them. So one that comes to mind is we're offering the opportunity to do a mobile link. So if you have mobile landing pages for your products, it's actually kind of an upgrade to the feed specifications. You don't have to submit it to us, but it's a great opportunity to make sure that the mobile traffic is going to a landing page that's designed for them. So I'd recommend, again, I know that's posted in multiple places, but check out the Inside AdWords blog, and then of course the Merchant Center Help Center will have the update to the feed specification details as well. Okay, so Ivan has a question. Will legacy PLA campaigns be automatically upgraded at the end of August? So it's a great question, and stay tuned for the details on what exactly will happen to regular PLA campaigns that are not manually upgraded. You'll want to stay tuned for those details because, in kind of short, it's not going to be the same type of careful, strategic upgrade that you can do manually. So regular PLA campaigns will not be able to run shortly after August 31st, so you will need to upgrade them, but just make sure you start sooner rather than later and don't wait for that auto upgrade. Simply do it on your own so that you can make sure your campaigns or your clients' campaigns are really upgraded the way that makes sense for the business. Okay, and then last question from Supply House before we sign off, unless we get any additional in the next couple seconds. So just to clarify, can we add ad group level negative keywords in AdWords Editor? I believe you should be able to. So again, the primary use is going to be bulk editing of bids and destination URLs, but negative keywords should also work as well, assuming that you have your structure broken out in the AdWords front end or API. So you have to have your ad groups, your product groups, etc., all created. Then you can use AdWords Editor to do some of these other bulk additions. Great. So I think that does it. Yeah, so I think that does it, and thank you so much for taking the time. I know you guys are busy, so we always appreciate you spending a few minutes with us to go through this stuff. Good luck on your upgrades, and we'll see you next time.